small town. Also has something on the radio. Alexa,
Good morning,
how the people there,
Rotary.
are so generous.
Happy November and happy Rotary Foundation Month. We have a new Sue on the ivories this morning, and we're going to sing America the Beautiful.
Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountains' majesty above the fruited plain. America, America, God sheds His grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea.
Thank you, Sue. Well done. Jim Ritter.
For our newer Rotarians in the audience, there's a website on Rotary that can give suggestions for morning implications. So I'm taking a passage from a Ken from Wisconsin. May those assembled here today enjoy the many offerings of Rotary. May we abide by the rules we have established, those of trust, fellowship, and ethics. And may we place service above self in our daily endeavors. And may we always test ourselves and our efforts to be sure they are the truth, good for all concerned, of benefit to mankind, and provide peace and understanding. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Jim. All right, Mike.
Mr. President.
Point of order here, Mr. Baker.
Excuse me. I'm running the meeting. Please sit down.
Mr. President. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not sure what that was, but,
You'll hear it. You'll see in a second.
Okay, so, good morning, Emmaus Rotary Club. We have a few guests this morning. First of all, Jeff Blake from some other Rotary Club somewhere in the valley. Jeff is here. Good to see Jeff here as always. And Zachary Ainsley. Zach Ainsley is here. Now, Zach took Gary's place. So is that like a young Gary Rohrbach?
Ouch!
No, it's a compliment. It's a compliment. So, and our speaker, Dr. Michael Davis, will be introduced by Alexa here in a moment. Good morning.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. Sorry that the immediate past president so rudely jumped up in front of you there.
That was very disappointing.
I'm just fine, and I will take credit for it. It's been really hard. There's been a lot of behind the scenes psychology stuff going on with the exiting.
Let's clarify. I can't jump.
You can't jump high. So just to upset Rick a little bit more, I think I'm going to move further down the agenda to basically say Peter's wise saying of the week. And this is the one, if you remember, a couple weeks ago, I was looking for having to do with membership, and I couldn't find it. It is good to introduce new blood. So remember, we have an initiative here this year for every member to bring a guest one time through this Rotary year. That's through the end of June 30th. It's getting fun watching everybody's eyes roll in their head when I say that up here. I can actually catch them in my peripheral vision. So, but let's make that happen. Let's see, what else can we do before Rick gets up? You know what? Hey, Rick, why don't we do birthdays?
Oh, now's the time?
Please hurry along.
All right, so we have November birthdays. If you can, please stand. If you can't, please stay seated. We have Steve Stauffer, November 1st. Bill Erdman, he is November 9th. Dale Dries, November 12th. We have Bob Kraus, November 15th. Steve Allville, November 16th. How do you say Guy's name?
Guyasani.
November 23rd. Rose Galliano Phillips, November 23rd. Dee Eng, November 25th. Chris DePaulo, November 30th. And Ashley Laura, November 30th. All right. Let's sing Happy Birthday, please.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear
All right, thank you. Thank you again, Sue.
Must add that line.
Just sit home one night with a glass of wine and hum it along. All right, let's have some announcements from the floor. Anyone? Gary?
Just a reminder, I know you're probably getting sick of the emails, but November 16th, am I right? 16th, I should know this, but not this Saturday. Next Saturday, we'll be out at the Canals House raking leaves, dragging, bring the leaf blowers, rakes, tarps, all that fun stuff. With enough people, it should take more than 2 hours. So appreciate all the help. Thanks, everyone.
All right, thanks, Gary. Eileen?
Well, the Angel Network, we collected 242 boxes of mac and cheese, so if you haven't brought one, you don't have to, but we can certainly use more. And November 19th is a Tuesday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon at Holy Spirit Church is when the Interact Club and all of the clubs at the high school fill the boxes for the needy. So if anybody wants to come and see how the process works, go to Holy Spirit Church at 3 o'clock on Tuesday the 19th, and you will see the students packing all the boxes and what good work our contribution helps to feed the needy.
Okay, is that in the trumpet?
It will be.
Perfect. Good. Thanks, Eileen. Karen?
We're still collecting twin blankets, comforters for Turning Point, and also I still have a Christmas list here for the kids up at the Zion's Church. So please see me if you'd like to take. It's $25 range if you'd like to take a Christmas present for a kid. All right.
Great, thank you. Ralph, I think I saw your hand go up.
I want to tell you all that we got 2 full boxes of food, and we also got $54 in money. And just so you all know, the money that I collect goes directly to the Emmaus Food Bank. What happens is, of course, either I bring the money down to Chris, and then Chris sends a check, or Jim Fonquist takes it down to Chris, and he sends a check each month for the amount that I collect to food banks. And the food bank uses that money to buy the stuff that they don't have, stuff that perishes and could perish, so like milk and butter and things like that they add to the bags when they pass them out to the people in need. So this is what happens with everything, and I appreciate those that donate and those that bring the food. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ralph, and thanks for your commitment to doing that every month. Anyone else? All right, where's Joanne? Raffle time.
Okay, we'll get one of the birthday boys to pick first.
It is good to introduce new blood.
Number is 971.
It is good to introduce new blood. Yes. That's been the first time in a long time.
It's weird feeling you were going to win. I was going to come to you first, and I thought I could do
Awesome.
that.
Yay.
But I did project it here. Go pick it up. 987.
All right, birthday buddy. Yeah, I noticed that. Larry just pointed out that everybody clapped for Ralph winning, but no one clapped for me.
Long numbers we have to read off in here, the serial numbers. Okay, 0970 or 710970.
970?
970 is the last 3 digits because it's 0970.
All right.
I got my walking in today. You go. Who do you want to
foundation.
Foundation, I guess.
Give it to whoever collects
Yeah,
money.
I'll put it in well, I'm gonna give it to the
Okay,
sergeant.
okay.
Thank you, Joanne. Mr. Sergeant.
So is anybody leaving early? I see that, nobody raises their hand. I knew it, I knew that wouldn't work. Everybody have a pin on? You raised your hand. Oh, that doesn't matter, you raised your hand. You know, all right, so Rick's gonna be fined for just being a jerk, okay? You know, but he has $10 up there that I know he kept. So I might look at trying to get his $10 too. Mr. President, sir. Where are you hiding that? You're putting the $10 away already, aren't you?
Keep it close, Don's not done.
And Larry, Chris Horniman is officially a member, so he can win, okay? Just one point. Do you need change? I do. Oh, jeez. I need change. All right. It's gonna get complicated here. I'm not gonna create anything. Let's go to happiness. Anybody have happy dollars? Alexa.
I have 5 happy dollars to reintroduce myself to y'all. Had a good time in Los Angeles preparing birthday cakes and Halloween costumes for grandkids. But that's not what I want to tell you about. My happy dollars were last night I went to my first PETS training, that's President-elect training, and I got to say these 3 things about Emmaus Rotary. I got to brag a little. 1, we like each other and have fun. 2, we give well to the foundation. And 3, we do good service projects.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, Steve, go ahead.
I have 11 happy dollars. I want to say how proud I am of the Emmaus High School boys soccer team. They are the District 11 champions. And I want to say how proud I am of, they're a class act. I mean, they are a class act. Their first states game was a rough one. The reffing was awful. I couldn't talk yesterday because of how much I was screaming at that game. But they handled themselves extremely well. I was really proud of them. So here's to them.
On Sunday, my Catherine, by virtue of, I think, coming in third in her district spelling bee, went to the Allentown Diocese-wide spelling bee. The Allentown Diocese consists of the counties of Lehigh, Northampton, Cardinal, Schuylkill County. And I'm proud to tell you that my daughter is the champion speller for all the Diocese of Allentown. For the
Barry?
Okay, I have 2 happy dollars. First of all, I'm happy that Zach came to visit with us here. When he first joined the Bartlett Tree expert company, we all encouraged him to become a Rotarian, and his main geographic area that he represented was Bethlehem, so he joined Bethlehem Star, Morning Star Club, and has been very active with them for quite a while. Now, since I'm retired, he's taking over Emmaus as well, so I'm trying to encourage him to switch over. But anyway, in anyone, he's a much better looking, younger version of me. Okay, the second happy dollar is for Bill Erdwin. I don't know how many of you know, but through the Lehigh Valley Chamber of Commerce, Bill's been very, very active volunteer, and he was selected the Volunteer of the Year, which is fantastic. So,
So I did an interesting thing yesterday. I think you might all want to consider. I took a day-long course called Mental Health First Aid. You know, we all know how to do should know how to do CPR and put a compression bandage on a person. There's actually programs out there to help you with mental health issues.
Thank you.
nice.
Yep. Go ahead, John.
First patient.
I'm eyeing you, actually.
I gave all my happy dollars except for 1 to the food bank today. And I'll give this one to you. I've been waiting for a while, as you may not have known.
Good, John. I thought I scared you away.
I'm waiting to hear from you, though. I was in Alaska for a while, and I was in Florida and the Bahamas, and I was in Indianapolis. Somehow I had to go out there for business, but it's good to be back. even though it's a lot colder here than it is in the Bahamas. But it was very nice in Alaska. It was, actually, the weather was more temperate in Alaska where we were than it is here. So figure that out. It's just not inland, but it's good to be back. Good to see some familiar faces, and looking forward to winning. Good.
Those are never words going to come out of my mouth. $10
Me
five
too.
for two of my kids. The one, David, my son, who's worked in marketing at Campbell Soup in Camden for 6 years, will be going to Portland, Oregon, a promotion for their organic subsidiary, Pacific Foods. And my daughter, who's getting married next year, she and her husband-to-be just moved into their new house up outside Toronto in Guelph, Ontario.
So I have two, whatever you want, a penny and $4.99. A penny because that's all that's left in my wallet after our son got married on Sunday. And I closed my wallet on Sunday night for that. And $4.99 because next week, I don't know if everybody's aware, but I'm on one of the board members of Habitat for Humanity. We have our Toast to Hope event next week. I won't be here for the meeting next Thursday because of that. It's the big fundraiser for us. It's a wine tasting, etc. Tickets are available online. We typically raise $50,000 to $75,000 at the event. So anyway, I just thought I'd brag about that.
Sal? Just real quick, I want to echo Steve's comments about the varsity soccer team. They did a great job. In addition to that, the JV team won their tournament. All the JV teams in the area get together for soccer, and they won, beating Parkland. I put my hand. So.
Great. That's what Mrs. Parkwood.
So Gary, thank you, because I was a little concerned about standing up and patting myself on the back. But I have $20 happy for the Volunteer Year Award, which will be granted today.
Awesome.
I know that we're creatures of habit, and we all have friends in here, and we come every week, and we like to sit with our friends, but I'm going to give a happy dollar for in praise of the merits of sitting somewhere different, because I sat here today with Laura, who I thought was a new member, and we got to know each other, and I found out she's been a member for 2 years. So.
Oh, all right, Karen.
I've got a happy dollar. I'm not going to be here next week, and I'm going to see my son in Corpus Christi.
I will not be here next week. Megan is supposedly filling in for me. Please be polite to her. Okay?
We like her wallet.
Right, you like her, so be very happy so that we can collect good money. Back to you.
Thank you, Don. All right, Alexa, what do we have cooking today? Is Eric here today?
Yeah.
Bell broke again.
Yeah, why'd you do that?
I think you need to use something better than
Yeah.
what you used.
Please. Don't say it. I don't want to hear it.
It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Michael Davis. He's an associate professor in the Department of Geology at Kutztown. Geography. He received his BA in geography from Kent State in 2006. His master's in atmospheric sciences from Ohio State in 2008, and his PhD in atmospheric sciences in 2011. Well credentialed. His master's thesis analyzed average seasonal temperatures across the United States from 1895 to 2006, and his doctoral dissertation examined air-sea interactions and radioactive properties of Southeast Pacific marine stratocumulus representation in global climate models. I couldn't even write that sentence.
I don't want you to talk about it afterwards. I'm happy.
At Kutztown, he teaches elements of physical geography, meteorology, weather analysis, climatology, and global warming, and the science of climate change. Dr. Davis has published in regional, national peer-reviewed journals and has served as a faculty supervisor for 22 undergraduate research students. Some have presented at national conferences, published papers, and have gone to graduate school. Dr. Davis spent 9 years teaching weather and climate to students at Kutztown. He lives in Emmaus, a couple blocks from me, with his wife, Heather, and their 1-year-old son, Noah, born in 2015, and baby 2 is on the way. Welcome, Michael.
So first I'd like to say thanks for having me, and it was kind of rough getting up at the crack of dawn today, but Noah was already up crying, so joys of parenting, right? So again, thank you, and I am Dr. Michael Davis of Kutztown University, the Department of Geography, and my main area of expertise is in meteorology and climatology. And I was asked by Courtney Kennedy to come talk today, so thank you again. I won't show this slide too long because of the introduction that was already given, but I just wanted to show you where I got my degrees and my scientific, I guess, curiosity quenched from those different institutions. And I've been teaching for 9 years at Kutztown and 3 years at Ohio State prior to that. So the main theme that I'm trying to get at here is mainly showing you how the science of climate change has formed and how it's developed and why climate change is indeed occurring and mostly driven by anthropogenic forces. Kind of the opposite of what I've been told the previous talk was on. So I guess a counterpoint here. And I will also say, if you got questions, I would prefer you to hold them till the end. I don't plan on talking that long, so I mainly want to have more of a discussion if that's indeed where you'd like to go. So, climate versus weather. They're both different. They're not exactly the same, but they do pertain to the same type of data. And weather is simply what's happening right now. So if I look outside right now, it is kind of more on the cloudy side, and it's cool. We have temperatures that were in the low 40s this morning. That being an example of the weather. As opposed to climate, which is going to be more of a long-term kind of average of the climate, or of the weather atmospheric conditions that are present. So for instance, if I were to say that November is going to be cool and cloudy and wet, that would be an example of climate. And I often say in class that if you look at it from this perspective, that weather is typically your mood, which can change day to day, but climate's more of your personality, so who you are as a person and whether or not your personality might be changing. So climate change is nothing new. I do have a couple of scientists up there that looked at greenhouse effect that was discovered back in the 1800s by Joseph Fourier, and then there was a couple of other scientists that looked at how gases in the atmosphere, like carbon dioxide, for instance, can impact those temperatures. One such person was Eunice Foote, not really gets a lot of attention in the scientific community, but she was pretty much the first to discover that carbon dioxide can change the temperature. And she was writing this paper back in the 1850s, and she was not permitted to present it at a conference simply because she was a woman. And that credit pretty much then went to the Irish climatologist John Tyndall, who pretty much proved the same thing, that infrared temperatures and the energy given off by the Earth can affect temperature. And then a few years later, you had Svante Arrhenius, who came forward and wrote a paper talking about how carbon dioxide can't change temperature. And then Guy Callender came along in the 1930s and showed that the temperature was indeed linked to carbon dioxide. Now, there's different ways you can collect temperature. There are some proxies that you can use for longer-term analysis, like ice cores or tree rings or sediment cores, as you see on the left-hand side of the screen there. On the right, we have more of the sophisticated, actual reliable data that has been documented since about 1895, where you have the in situ observations. These would be actually taken by a weather station or a weather observer, or since the 1960s we've had remote sensing and satellites which have been giving us information remotely. Now, carbon concentrations have been changing over time. In the 1950s, Dr. Charles David Keeling went to Hawaii and was calculating how much carbon dioxide was on top of the Mauna Loa volcano, and that curve is what you see on the left. On the right, which looks at how carbon dioxide concentrations have been going up steadily since the 1950s. And you see that up, down nature consistent with the amount of vegetation on the planet. So in the summertime, you have more plants, they take in more carbon, you have less carbon in the atmosphere, as opposed to if you had less vegetation, more carbon in the wintertime. And then there's also the Epica ice core, which was cored from Antarctica, which goes back 800,000 years. And you can look at how the atmosphere was structured at different points of that time period, and how the 2017, we have about 405 parts per million compared to 800,000 years in the past. If you take the atmosphere and chop it up into a million pieces, 405 parts of that atmosphere would be represented by carbon dioxide. And that concentration is the highest we've seen in quite some time. In fact, the rate at which we're seeing this increase is somewhat alarming for climate scientists. Now, the temperature variations have been fluctuating, and you have had periods of warmer versus periods of colder in the climate. And Dr. Michael Mann over at Penn State, he's a very well-known climate scientist, and he wrote the book, The Madhouse Effect, recently, so if you're interested in picking up the book, it's a fascinating read. I have my students read it in Global Warming and the Science of Climate Change. But he looked at those proxies, so those ice cores, tree rings, and so forth, and found that if you reconstruct the past going back to about the year 1000, you get pretty much a temperature anomaly, as we see here, and then you have pretty much stable conditions till about 1900, where the Industrial Revolution took place, and you have this very sharp increase in Northern Hemisphere temperatures. And he published this back in 1993 or so, and this was pretty much attacked by climate skeptics, saying that it's not reliable because you're looking at proxy data. Now, long-term variations in climate, you have to look at these proxies because that's what we have. But then the scientific community said, you know what? Let's try replicating what Dr. Mann did. And this is what they got. So you had 12, 15 or so different articles that then tried to replicate and duplicate what Michael Mann did, and we got pretty much the same thing. This graph that we saw previously came known as the hockey stick graph because it looks like the shape of a hockey stick. This graph has been termed the hockey league because of all the sticks that are showing pretty much the same thing. Now, climate models are our best bet as to try to forecast what exactly is going to be happening in the future. And those climate models have now since translated to Earth system models, which focus more on how the atmosphere, the land, and the ocean all interact with one another. But one of the very first primitive forms of climate models came from Dr. James Hansen, as you see right there. He was the director of NASA Goddard Institute. And I have a Verdi restaurant that you've probably seen in Seinfeld. And during this time period, 4 stories up, Dr. Hansen was running his climate model, and then famously went for Congress in 1988 and said that climate is changing, and it's a result of human activity. And this has been published in numerous articles, and he's also published a book, Storms of My Grandchildren, which talks about that. And his new book, Sophie's Planet, is coming out next year. So Dr. Hansen ran all these different models, looking at the model simulation of the past, it doesn't really seem to focus, there we go. And if you look at the global mean temperatures going back from 1980 to the 60s, you get what is shown in the red. Then he ran these different scenarios to go along with it. One showing what would happen in a high carbon environment, not so high carbon, and a complete reduction in carbon. And that's what he had as he ran it out. Because the best way to calculate whether your climate model is doing any good is to look at the forecast the past. So if you're forecasting well the climate of the past couple decades, stands to reason you should be able to do that for the future. So those are the different scenarios that were posed, and the red is showing you the observed data. So it seems to be going along fairly well. But Dr. Hansen recently has been saying that we are failing miserably at addressing climate change. And those efforts that are being put forth are, to put in his words, bullshit. So he is a very bullish on climate change and thinks that we should be making a lot of big efforts toward addressing it. So where's all this energy going? If we know that temperatures are going up, and we know that the Earth is maintaining more energy, most of that energy, as you see in the figure on the left, is going into the ocean. The ocean is the big reservoir of the planet. And those ocean temperatures are going up and taking in more energy, more so than the ice and the land. But as I lose my, oh dear. There we are. We're back. Wonderful. Cable came undone. And then if you look at how the human and natural influences have been occurring, if you were to say, let's remove the entire human equation. So these would be things like ozone, carbon dioxide, methane, and so forth. That would be examples of human influence. And that's what you would get in the center graph there, as opposed to what you would have with more the anthropogenic side, which would be the release of carbon dioxide through the burning of fossil fuels. If you take them together, you get the bottom graph. The middle graph, oh, that's all the human influences, natural influences on top. The actual temperatures are represented in the black line. The best relationship that we're seeing is a blend of the human and natural influences, but the human influences seem to be mirroring the trend the best. Therefore, they seem to be the primary driver. And because the oceans are taking a lot of energy, you're having sea level rise, where the oceans are rising depending on what emission scenario you were looking at, anywhere from about 0.5 meter to 2.5 meters by the end of the century, which roughly equates to about 3 to 8 feet or so. And the oceans are getting more acidic as you're getting more carbon being put into them. So mollusks, seafood and so forth, those shells are being thinned, and we're seeing that in the literature and in oceanic voyages. And the sea ice has been decreasing as well, as you see from this graph, and that ice extent can affect things like migratory patterns of birds, temperature variations in the northern hemisphere. It's affecting storm patterns and other major features in the atmosphere. Now, if we continue to put more carbon in the atmosphere, we're going to be increasing the temperature, because carbon dioxide is a selective absorber. It takes in that energy and stores it. And that energy is then going to be used for driving storms, a warmer temperature, increasing the carrying capacity of water. We're seeing a lot more flood events. We're seeing a lot more rainfall. The U.S. National Climate Assessment in 2018 pointed out that the northeastern United States is at risk of more flooding events and more rainfall. While most of the country looks like it's drying out, the Northeast should be getting more wet. And severe storms can also be linked to these as well. Take Hurricane Harvey, for instance, that happened in Houston just 2 years ago. It got separated from the actual steering current in the atmosphere and sat over Houston, Texas, and rained and rained and rained. At one point, you could walk faster than the storm was moving. And in a 3-day period, Houston got 62 inches of rain, which was an absolute incredible amount. And all that water pushed the crust of the earth down 2 inches. Water is an incredible force. And you also have stronger storms that might be affecting the United States, particularly in the wintertime. We might be seeing more in the way of big swings in temperature, big snowfalls potentially, more frequently and more intense as the loss of sea ice happens in the Arctic. Now, whether or not you say, you know what, Mike, what you're saying, the science, it's all true, and I recognize these numbers, but perhaps you think that maybe there's something else to the story that I'm overlooking. But the fact is, we've been seeing a greater acceptance of science recently, as we see in this graph here, and professional organizations that are out there, like the American Meteorological Society, the Advanced American Academy of Sciences, American Geophysics Union, they've all said that climate change is indeed a big threat to the world, and we should be thinking about addressing it. And to what extent we should address it, that seems to be where we're having some debate. Now, I've been talking about the scientific literature, and what goes on with the scientific literature is that, let's say I have an idea that I want to publish, like, okay, climate change isn't real because I said it's not. I would then submit that to a journal, and I would then test out that idea, and then it would get peer reviewed by other people in my field. And then hopefully it would get accepted. If not, I have to go back and rechange it. So those journals are essentially publishing what your ideas are, your research, and it gets approved by the community, by a panel of your peers. And eventually, if you can keep replicating those ideas, there becomes fewer and fewer flaws within the data, and then the data becomes so overwhelming that pretty much any theory that is out there cannot explain what we've been seeing. And this has been the cause of some great concern, especially in my field of climate science, where we've been seeing more and more climate scientists issue dire warnings about what's coming in the future. We also see that people are starting to get more interested in climate science. In fact, some of the polls have been showing that, at least among Democratic voters, that climate change is the #1 concern that they have going into this election cycle. And then you have grassroots efforts like Greta Thunberg there, or the Sunrise Movement, a local grassroots effort that's been aiming at trying to promote green, renewable agendas, and whether or not the Green New Deal is our best bet at moving forward. So there's some concern that's out there, and climate science is trying to convey to the people what exactly is going on, but the problem is I'm not a communicator, and being not a very good communicator, because my degrees are mostly in looking at numbers and data, we need to bridge that gap. How can we get the word out in an effective manner? So that's pretty much my talk. So I will yield the floor to any questions you might have. Oh.
I was very pleased to see you use the terminology global warming.
Do you want me to comment on the global warming term? Is that perhaps it's more of a global warming because temperatures are going up. Now, whether or not they're all going up in a uniform manner, that's going to change from region to region.
On average, how much is the temperature of the oceans has gone up?
It depends on what part of the ocean you're looking at, but the temperatures have been going up roughly about half a degree or so, a degree Celsius. So if
Half degree Celsius?
Yes, since about 1990, I'm gonna say.
Is that per year?
No, I don't know offhand if that's per year. I don't know the rate.
I heard an interesting thing on the news a few weeks ago related to the La Nina and El Nino effects, and they indicated that we don't have one of those this year. I didn't realize you could have a year without either one of those occurring.
You do have neutral conditions that can occur in the El Nino Southern Oscillation. Sometimes it's called La Nada, but you have neutral conditions that are experiencing right now in the Pacific Ocean. So we're not really looking at an El Nino or a La Nina type winter. That's where we're going. Because typically, if we have an El Nino type winter, it's more wet for us, as opposed to, more warm, and La Nina is more wet.
Is that a common occurrence to be neutral?
Yeah, usually from time to time. It's about a 3 7-year cycle, so we do go through it about every 3 7 years or so.
To your point counterpoint, the previous presentation, and I don't remember exactly the term you used, the characterization was, well, two things. That it's not the raw data, that it's somehow being, and I'll use the term manipulated, but it didn't say that. And then the question, what's that?
Data homogenization.
Homogenization. The next question, I think it was asked at the meeting, was, okay, well, are you saying that the entire science community is doing this? And he suggested that it's some sort of a conspiracy around the world, that all the scientists are weighing in on this homogenization. What's your thought, your response to that? I found that hard to believe.
Now there are some, when you look at the data, and going back to reliable weather observations from 1895 to the present, you do have some potential discrepancies that you have to account for, such as instrumentation measuring the data from 1895 to the present. You also have the urbanization effect, where most of the airports back in the 1930s, 1940s were pretty much in fields, and then you have the urbanization go on around those airports now. Now, those data that have been collected are then sent to the World Meteorological Organization, which then collects data from around the world and pretty much ensures that that data has been collected correctly and that those biases have been accounted for. What those steps are, I don't really think I can speak to that too much, but the data that is then disseminated from the World Meteorological Organization is then being used by climate scientists, such as myself, who then do these studies. And then, if you talk about the climate community itself, it seems to me as though this whole idea of a climate conspiracy is strange, and I don't know where exactly it's coming from, because you're talking about tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of scientists that are somehow in on all this. And you would think that at some point someone would say something. And if you're looking at all the journal articles that have been published, say, since the year 2000, we've been seeing roughly about 97, 98% of them that have been siding with anthropogenic climate science. And going from that 98% seems quite awfully high. So if you were to go to, say, a doctor and 98% of them say do it this way, 2% say do it that way, I don't know what you would do if you want to go with the majority versus the minority in that case. And it also seems strange that the ones that are poking at climate science are those that are in power or those that are involved in the fossil fuel industry. So somehow or other, this 97, 98% is being outed by politicians, fossil fuel industry, and it doesn't resonate well with the scientific community.
So those adjustments that were characterized as homogenization are scientific processes to make the data real and take into account variables that could affect it in the wrong way, et cetera.
Yes, you also have
So
that.
it's a scientific-based process.
Yes, you also have that for the spatial network that we currently have, because back in the 1920s, we didn't have the extensive network that we have today. And also the time element, how do you account for longer periods of time?
Everyone, I'm gonna, it's 8:30, if you wanna stick around and ask some questions afterwards, Dr. Davis, thank you very much, here's a little parting gift for you. Thank you. All right, if we could all please stand and we'll end the meeting with Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks, everybody.